Hello, neighbor. I'm Robert Burns, and welcome once again to another edition of Sound Off Louisiana. Today is installment 8 of our series of interviews with former Alcohol and Tobacco Control Commissioner Murphy Painter. And as we wrapped up segment 7, we touched on the fact that Stephen Street was none too pleased to find out that one of Mr. Painter's attorneys had made an appeal to the United States Supreme Court on a matter involving his civil trial. And as I recall correctly, Mr. Preston Castile, who is the defense attorney working this case, alerted Mr. Street of that fact. It did not sit well with Mr. Street, and so in the meantime that attorney had procured an attorney position with the DOTD, and Mr. Street basically made contact with the governor's office and requested that attorney be terminated, and he soon was. He successfully won civil service appeal, and as Mr. Painter indicated, he got, quote, hundreds of thousands of dollars to agree not to return to work for DOTD. And let me just say this, we are going to provide you with the transcript. I know we've referenced it. We are going to provide you with the actual transcript of Stephen Street, Inspector General Stephen Street, during the criminal trial of Mr. Painter. And I will draw your attention to the top of page 22 of that transcript because, as I have said on numerous occasions, both with Mr. Painter and separately, so as I was saying, Mr. Street was not pleased with that particular development of the Supreme Court appeal, and so he opted to terminate, or opted to contact the governor's office and ask that the attorney who filed that appeal, who had since gotten a job with an attorney's position with the Department of Transportation and Development, be terminated. And that was accomplished, and as Mr. Painter relayed, that attorney was provided with hundreds of thousands of dollars to agree not to return to work from DOTD. And I'll again reiterate that if you go to the top of the transcript that we're providing for you of Mr. Street's testimony in the criminal trial, you will notice that at the top of page 22, it is as I had remembered that it was, and that is that in a very short period of time, on 3 different occasions, he stated that he didn't have the integral knowledge of this case and that anyone would have to speak with his investigators. And so with that, I'm going to bring Mr. Painter back in. So we're going to provide you with a link for that transcript because I think you'll find it quite interesting. It is an interesting read, I'll put it that way. We're going to welcome back Mr. Painter to further elaborate on anything he'd like today. So
thank you, Robert. I hope everybody's not getting too bored with all this stuff. I only probably have about 24 hours that I could go over a whole lot of stuff, but anyway, Robert was fascinated again by being in the hearings and in the trial situation and listening to what was going on from an outsider's point of view, and I mean that's one thing that we're trying to reiterate here to the average person that might not have a whole lot of knowledge how the system works or not. I mean, somebody, especially a blowhard, can stand up and accuse people of everything in the world, but when you get on the stand and you raise your hand and you have to tell the truth, or you're supposed to tell the truth, or say what you know or don't know at that particular point of time, it really changes a lot of times what has been said or not said. So all this stuff that went on from August 13th of 2010 until this trial situation in 2013, all those news conferences and times before the legislature that Stephen Street stood up and called me a crook to everybody and said that he had me dead to rights on all kinds of things, that and that it was all his responsibility. He was taking full credit for everything that took place. When it come time in court for him to put up or shut up, he very quickly said that that he didn't have any first-hand information of a lot of stuff. All he did was transfer information from his investigators to the governor's office, and that the governor's office made the decision to fire me. Now, what's ironic is that the governor's office put out that that after being confronted that I was being investigated by a law enforcement agency, that I resigned. And that is an outright lie, 1,000% an outright lie. And the governor's office later came back and recanted that statement and corrected itself and said that they in fact fired me. Now, let's go back, I guess, to the deposition that Robert is talking about. He sat and heard firsthand, and there's just so much again on this that is real important to the general public. Not only then, 11 years ago, but even today, and maybe even more today, as things are going along in the law enforcement world and the world where nobody really cares about a constitution anymore too much, or there's so much misinformation that's being thrown out for the average person, the average public, to try to decipher and understand who the good guys and the bad guys are. But yeah, anyway, in that deposition, I mean, and in everything that's taken place here, they have beaten their chest and hoot and holler, and I'm saying they, I'm talking about the Inspector General's office and specifically Stevens Street, since 2008, that there's some kind of law enforcement agency. Now, when you're a law enforcement agency, again, we have a constitution of the United States of America along with the laws of the state of Louisiana, and there's certain things that take place. The first thing is that Mr. Street needs to do is to read the Bill of Rights that talk about the rights of a citizen, of somebody being accused of something in this world. And specifically, Robert brought to my attention after reading the deposition again, where kind of at the end of the deposition, Stephen again was beating his chest and saying, well, we issued a report, and at no time since that report was issued did Mr. Painter ever try to write a correction or say that anything in the report was wrong. Well, that's not completely true either, because I mean, I went on TV and said everything in the report was wrong a whole bunch of times. As far as me playing a game with somebody that has no sense of understanding or cannot, claims he's a law enforcement officer, claims he's a lawyer, but that sat there and accused me of crimes on TV, in a written report, him and his people over and over again, and then expects me or wants me to cower back and put something in writing to him, or to try to get into some kind of discussion and argument with him over his deal. I did exactly what I was supposed to do under that situation. He defamed me, his office defamed me. They had a year to prove or disprove what the hell they were claiming that I did or didn't do, and I sued them.
So there was your answer to his report.
In district court, 19th Judicial District Court in East Baton Rouge Parish, and made all the allegations in writing of his irresponsibility in reporting, his irresponsibility as a law enforcement officer, and the irresponsibility of his agency in the way that they were acting, where they think they had some kind of superpower where they can write a report and go tell everybody that you're guilty because they wrote a report and put something in a report that obviously wasn't true. And then at the same time, try to prosecute you in a criminal matter that play both hats, if you want to say at the time, and the Constitution doesn't allow any of that to take place in the United States of America. But Stephen Street says it happens, and it says he can do it as an Inspector General of the state of Louisiana. Now, that is so ridiculous, and I really can't understand why more people have not said something about this. The 3 times that I'm aware of that he has tried to implement this superpower that he claims that he has all ended up in 3 lawsuits.
Yes.
Against that agency. And you can go research or have somebody else tell you about the other ones along the line. But nobody's been convicted of anything that I know of as a result of Stephen Street or his investigators. Now, they've taken credit for a lot of stuff that other people have done, and that's all fine and dandy. I guess that's how some people keep their job. But another fallacy that Mr. Street gets up in the morning and I guess dreams about and beats his chest and says that he's an independent agency in the state and that he doesn't answer to anybody. Well, that's another damn lie.
Point blank lie.
That is a damn lie. You can't have to answer to the governor's office, which happened in my case, because all he had to do, instead of going to run to the governor's office and hoot and holler about who I was running on database checks, honestly and above board within my job, and there's plenty of depositions and plenty of testimony that's taken place since August the 13th to prove just exactly what that happened, and thank God enough for 12 people on the jury to hear and understand real quick that it was all a bunch of made up stuff. But anyway, all he had to do was come to me as a head of a real law enforcement agency, and I would have showed him everything that I was doing so he would understand how real law enforcement people work and the real use of law enforcement databases in order to solve crime or criminal matters, or in my case, part of the job that I was doing, which would be issue a license to somebody that wasn't a convicted felon, or that somebody affiliated with him was applying for the license in order to keep them from having to say that they were a convicted felon. But anyway, there's so much involved in that, and Stephen Street has no idea, and I bet you today, 11 years later, he still has no idea what the Office of Alcohol and Tobacco Control does as a legitimate law enforcement agency in pursuing enforcing the legal laws of the state of Louisiana as far as alcohol and tobacco control.
And I want to interject just one thing very briefly, I won't take but a second, but Stephen Street is very sensitive about even being questioned with regard to his independence. And on a separate video, we're going to give you a little clip where I directly confronted him, because I have challenged that so-called independence on a number of occasions, and I've challenged him to his face. And I want you to see how uneasy he gets when questioned about that. And you know, if you're heading an agency, you would think you would get straight into the camera and say, let me tell you something. And that's not what he does. You'll see him skirt the issue and just go, Mr. Burns, we are independent of the governor's office. You'll see the clip. But he's very sensitive about that and takes offense to my statement that he's not independent. Obviously, I'm sure he'll take offense to Mr. Painter's thing, but the organization chart itself shows him reporting to the governor. Reports that he writes have to be approved by the governor's office. So how he even makes the claim that he's independent is beyond me. Furthermore, he made the statement to me on camera that I can't be removed by the governor. Well, the reality is all it takes, and I would assume he's read this statute given that it governs his employment. All that is required to remove Stephen Street is that the governor get the concurrence of a majority members of the House and the Senate, and Stephen Street is gone. When you are the governor of this state, that's not an overly difficult accomplishment. Thank you for letting me interject that, because I just felt the need because of his extreme sensitivity when you ask him or
Well, and again, to the law students in the world and other people that really care about our Constitution and doing the right thing for the right reasons, the law itself that allegedly gives Stephen Street and the Office of Inspector General law enforcement authority was filed by a representative in I think the 2008 legislative session, and that bill had some issues in committee, but it was stated in committee, which for lack of a better thing, a little law class. Laws just don't pop up out of the sky, okay? For the legislature to pass a law, somebody has to go before a committee and show a need, a legitimate need for that law. Then it goes through a process, and you have to testify and what your intentions are, how it's going to be enforced, or why you're going to use it, or whatever else along the line. Then if it does happen to pass and the governor signs it, then it's put into play. But it's put into play by human beings that have to interpret now the policy and go back and look and see what was said was the intention of the law, the intent of it, and try to do, an honest person is supposed to try to do what the intent is to make that law work to serve the function that it was intended to do. Now, the first law passed out of committee. I mean, the first hearing it passed out of hearing, but then that legislator resigned and went somewhere else in the world, and so the legislature made the ruling that meant that law that Stephen Street passed and testified to died, and they did away with it. It wasn't valid anymore. So instead of going back through the original process or whatever it is, they found a bill and got authority from, I guess, the Governor General at the time, who was so big hip on having this so-called superpower Inspector General agency, that they just attached some verbiage to a bill that was already halfway through the legislature, or 3/4 of the way through the legislature, and it never did really get any traction as far as anybody saying anymore why they were asking for this power or anything else. So you have to go back to the first bill where Stephen Street and his people testified, and they said the main reason they needed the bill, they needed the law enforcement authority, was to get legal access to the databases that later they're accusing me of having misused. That was their whole intent or need for doing that. And believe me, I know, because I've been a real policeman for, at that time, 34 years. And I know how to use the database in order to gain intelligence information and the right information to prove whether a crime is taking place or it's not, or aid in trying to figure out whether a guy is a good guy or a bad guy. And that is exactly what a real law enforcement officer does with that information, other than identifying people to show that they are who they are, so that you can do some kind of legal process with them or whatever else. But anyway, that was the intent of that. Now, as it flourished from 2008 to 2010, now they're sitting there saying that all of a sudden they are a full-fledged law enforcement agency. They don't need anybody else to tell them when to or to file, or they can't not support. They're going to initiate their own investigations, criminal investigations. When what? When it's a big political deal for somebody? When there's some big issue going on, like whether somebody's going to get an exclusive contract to serve alcohol at a state agency, which is totally against the law. Whether they got other stuff that's going on that's illegal and there's a bunch of politics involved in it, or they want to get rid of somebody on the deal and they need a reason to throw dirt on that person, so that they can fire him or get rid of him, and then try to blame his incompetence or his doing something wrong instead of just being some political deal? I mean, that's how ridiculous all this stuff is.
Well,
Stephen Street cannot, according to law, and any lawyer or anybody worth a hoot, and if it ever goes for a judge and is put in the proper prospect of how it is, the law specifically says that he can aid in an investigation for another law enforcement agency, but that if he finds something criminal, he has to turn that information over to another law enforcement agency. Specific in law. Now, he wants to say, the law also says he has full law enforcement authority. It never says that. It has a funny word that I can't even explain or try to pronounce, oppugnant, that they have all authority, oppugnant, or something along that line, to some, to all law enforcement agencies. That's another lie. A law enforcement person is someone with arrest power. They have no arrest power. He is not a law enforcement officer.
well, and I'll add to that, the legislature was careful to put some protections when they granted this authority, one of which was a 48-hour waiting period on subpoenas, and they did not give the Inspector General's office explicit search warrant authority. Now, Stephen Street would argue that, well, they didn't have to, it's a given, we've got it. But I will just tell you that in one of the cases he's referenced, John McClendon, who is an excellent defense attorney, just flat out challenged. He said, I do not believe you have search warrant authority, and he challenged it in one of the two cases Mr. Painter is referencing, and the judge ruled, you don't. She, it's a female judge, said, it's pretty clear to me you don't have search warrant authority. So that got appealed to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. The First Circuit didn't really want to touch the issue of the search warrant authority, so they remanded it back to the trial court saying, we want you to have a hearing on the constitutionality of this search. And it was at that point that, the judge had suppressed all of the evidence, all of the evidence obtained in that search, because she said it was an illegal search. You don't have search warrant authority. The First Circuit remanded it back down and wanted for arguments to take place on the constitutionality of that search. It was at that point that all of the charges against that particular defendant were dropped. I don't think he wanted a final word on whether they had search warrant authority or not, because I think he fears that it would be as the judge said, you do not. So I'll just throw it back to you, but I just wanted to reiterate that the legislature didn't just roll out the red carpet and say, here, you're now a full-fledged law enforcement agency. They put specific restrictions in to try to keep, in my opinion, some of the renegade actions that have transpired. And unfortunately, those safeguards appear to have failed us. And the collective, I have tried, I've made public records requests to get the total defense costs, not only of his case, of his civil case, and I'll give the name because I've already published it, Corey Delahuse's as well. Now the problem is they say that until there has been a judgment and the appeal period has passed, those aren't, I said you can redact everything, I just want to find, I just want the dollar amounts, how much time and how much dollar amount. But they told me, well, I say that, they told me, Zach Parker, who is a reporter for the Monroe area, Washita Citizen, I believe is the name of their newspaper, he did file suit under the same premise. It's a totally different matter. But I went to that case, so I knew there was no point in me filing one because of what the ruling was. And it is, as I just said, you have to wait until the final judgment is handed down and the 30-day appeal window has passed without an appeal before they can release those invoices so that we can tally up. But I can tell you right now, I mean, I would not be surprised at all for it to have been up to $800,000, if not more, on his case alone. So when Stephen Street has said, because he's used this analogy about his office, he has said, sure, you can save $10 by not having the plug in a boat, you know, but you'll lose the whole boat because it fills up with water. I would argue the counter side is that we have spent a massive amount of money defending civil lawsuits due to his irresponsibility. And it's frustrating not to be able to get those dollar amounts, but one day I am going to be able to. I just don't know when. So let me throw it back.
I hope we live long enough to do that, because I think that's the strategy that they're trying to play with me, is want me to go by the wayside some kind of way. But I'll just simply here as a law enforcement, lifelong law enforcement person, and someone that has thought or at least attempted to go out and try to educate himself and make decisions based on education and experience and stuff along that line, that the OIG's office is a farce. It is nothing but a facade to give somebody some feel-good feeling that supposedly there's somebody in the state that is independent, that go reach out and go find all the stuff. Can you imagine? Just all somebody's got to do is read the paper any day of the week to talk about the corruption that goes on in this state.
It's massive.
And there's not one time in any normal situation has the Inspector General's office been the one to find any of that or to be the stopgap in it. Now, it's redundant. It's a redundant agency. The Attorney General's office does the same thing. The state police does the same thing. Any local law enforcement has the same authority to do the same thing. And the person that really is the responsibility for doing what he claims is supposed to be done is a legislative auditor. And they do a fantastic job and have done a fantastic job in what they do. They don't run around and talk about having the power to arrest anybody. And when they issue a report, I hadn't seen too many of their reports ever overturned or argued or that wound up in any lawsuits anywhere. But anyway, the only other thing I would like to say about that at this particular time, we've deposed all these people in our case, and I'm still waiting. There's not one. Shane Evans, Greg Farries, Stephen Street, not one of those so-called superhuman OIG investigators, law enforcement gurus, have said one thing criminal that I allegedly did or didn't do in this situation. Still now, 11 years later, they can talk and hoot all they want. But time is the teller of everything, and all the truths all come to light with time. And the only truth that's come to light with time on all this deal, that this thing stunk from the beginning with them being involved in it to start with. If allegedly, if anybody was doing anything wrong with any FBI databases or state police databases, the state police or the FBI would have been the people to come forth or say, or for somebody to file a complaint with. Not ironically that somebody files a complaint with the Inspector General's office, who answers directly to the governor, who's in a peeing contest with me over whether somebody should get an exclusive right to sell alcohol in the state of Louisiana, when the law specifically says that it's against the law. And not just alcohol and tobacco law, I'm talking about law in fair trade laws and everything else. You can't pay to play. That's illegal anywhere.
Well,
But anyway, then let me just share this.
Sure.
I want to, 2 weeks before I got fired, Governor Jindal went to a fundraiser. Now, he wasn't allegedly running for president at this time. 2 weeks before I was fired, he went to a fundraiser in St. Louis, Missouri. The governor of Louisiana went to a fundraiser in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm going to let you figure out what's in St. Louis, Missouri. Okay? That was in the newspaper 2 weeks before I got run off.
wow.
But okay. Anyway, go ahead. What you want to say?
Well, and you have to forgive me, I drew a blank, so I'm gonna have to defer back to you.
Well, I just want to spend a little time, and maybe this will be the last one on this one, unless y'all want to call in and ask any specific questions to Robert. I'll be more than happy to explain or try to explain anything from my side of view. How it happened. I've left out so much stuff, so I don't want anybody to come back and say, "Oh, I'm going to use this against you because you didn't say this or you didn't say that." I mean, this thing is so involved, and it involves so many people in this particular deal. But I hadn't been afraid to sit and call it like it is, and I'll be more than happy to do the same thing in court, out of court, whatever they want to do.
It came back to me.
Okay.
You talking about the OIG needing to take a back seat and not supposed to get into the front seat and drive an investigation. In this particular situation, the OIG is all that was left, okay? As he's pointed out, he went to the FBI, and we have no interest in this. Goes to the Attorney General's office, we don't have the slightest interest in this. So who are you gonna have as that lead agency so that you can play a backup role? Well, there's nobody left. So by default, Stephen Street and his office went ahead and took the steering wheel. They got in the front seat, and we see what's happened. So I followed it, I had a little blank out there, but there was just nobody. There was no lead agency that could have properly taken over this because they said we're not interested.
Not only, but I mean, I want to reiterate, they wasn't interested because they're not interested. They wasn't interested because it's BS.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't nothing but BS. That's why nobody else was interested. I mean, the head of the state police was in the damn room when I was fired. I'm accused of misusing state police databases. Where in the hell is the state police investigation? The lady that testified for the state police in my in the case against me testified under oath that as a radio operator in Troop A, early in her career, with maybe 5 or 8 troopers operating in the Troop A area, that she would run 1,000 driver's license checks a night, a shift. Now, take that whatever way you want. Let's go back and check every one of them 1,000 and see what was being run or whatever. It's all made up. It's all a fabricated deal from the get-go.
Well, and one of the attorneys who was asked to investigate the entire plethora of things that were alleged with Mr. Painter, with regard to this specific matter, the use of the database, he said, look, this is just not going to rise to the level, and the absolute best case you might be able to get out of this is a misdemeanor. So how, given that report, somehow that gets elevated all the way up to the level of ever how many years in prison and felony counts is beyond me, other than it was a political vendetta. And I don't know how anybody can sit through that trial and not come away with any other impression. But
well, it wasn't a vendetta. I mean, there was specific political benefits that people received by me not being
exactly, it's a vendetta that you didn't play ball is what I mean.
Head of alcohol and tobacco control anymore. There was a lot of stuff, and that's a whole nother 10-hour segment of what was going on in the country at that time as far as alcohol control, what my position was on that as a regulator, and all kind of other things. I mean, we've come a long way. You got alcohol in Tiger Stadium now. Got alcohol at the baseball field. I don't see but one brand when they show TVs, shots of people drinking. I hadn't seen but one brand.
Wow.
So I don't know how all that works anymore. Maybe they changed the law. Maybe they didn't. But anyway, Robert, that's 35, 40 minutes. Why don't we give them a break this go round?
I'm for that. We're coming up on Easter, so
call this one an end. The only other thing I'm thinking of at this time, unless anybody had any specifics they want to try to get me to hang myself on camera, which is what everybody loves to try to do with me. But anyway, next go round, I want to spend a little time talking about the 15 years that I spent at ATC and what was accomplished during that time, and some of the trials and tribulations that was about, and then we'll try to wrap that up and call this a wrap.
That'll work, because you're absolutely right. people only remember, number one, the worst and the note that go out on. Everybody will forget about, well, how much good was done in the 15 years leading up to that. And like I said at the outset, when we started all these interviews, worked through 3 administrations, only one of which appeared to have any turbulence at all to it. But boy, it did make up for the other 2, did it?
Sure did.
So thank y'all once again. We're going to have this episode, going ahead and release it prior to Easter. So we hope you have an enjoyable 3-day Easter weekend, and we'll put this segment back up soon after we've celebrated Easter Sunday. Thank you so much for your dedication, and hope you found this series to be fascinating, and will continue to do so. So this is Robert Burns wishing you a very happy Easter weekend.
Me also. Thank you.
Very good.